By mid-1944, the Pacific War had entered its decisive phase. The Empire of Japan, once expanding across Asia and the Pacific, now stood on the defensive. The American island-hopping campaign, relentless, methodical, and backed by overwhelming industrial power, was closing in. The next target, Saipan, the largest of the Mariana Islands. To Japan, Saipan was more than a military outpost. It was the outer wall of the homeland. From its airfields, American bombers could reach Tokyo itself. The loss of Saipan would mean the enemy could strike at the emperor's very doorstep. To defend it, Japan threw everything it could spare, including its remaining tanks. The primary armored vehicle of Japan's ground forces was the Type 95 Hago light tank. First designed in the early 1930s, the Hago was born from a very different vision of war. When it first rolled off Japanese production lines, the Hago was considered agile and reliable. It weighed just 7.4 tons, small, fast, and capable of traversing jungle terrain where heavier vehicles might bog down. Its 37mm main gun could destroy older, lightly armored vehicles, and its 12mm armor was enough to protect against rifle fire and shrapnel. But by 1944, the world had changed. The Hago had not. In China and Southeast Asia, the Hago had once reigned supreme. Against poorly equipped adversaries, it was effective. But in the Pacific, facing the United States Marine Corps, it was hopelessly outmatched. The Americans fielded the M4 Sherman, a 30-ton beast of steel, armed with a 75mm cannon, coated in thick armor, and supported by a vast logistical machine that could replace any loss within days. Yet the Japanese High Command refused to accept that reality. They clung to an outdated belief that spirit and courage could compensate for material inferiority. In Japanese doctrine, the tank was not an independent weapon. It was a tool to support infantry, to exploit breakthroughs, not create them. So while the rest of the world's armies were building heavier, deadlier tanks, Japan's armored forces stood still, locked in the doctrines of the past. When American forces prepared to invade Saipan in June 1944, Japan deployed its 9th Tank Regiment to defend the island. It consisted mostly of Hago light tanks, many of which had already seen years of combat in China. The terrain was unforgiving: volcanic soil, dense cane fields, coral ridges. But the Japanese were determined to fight to the last. For many of those tank crews, Saipan would be their final battle. They believed their mission was sacred, to stop the Americans before they could threaten the emperor's homeland. They had trained for years, convinced that discipline, courage, and devotion could overcome any obstacle. What they did not know was that they were about to face an enemy that fought with the combined power of technology, industry, and logistics. Weapons born not just from battlefields, but from factories thousands of miles away. While Japan struggled to supply even a handful of tanks, across the Pacific, the United States had transformed itself into the arsenal of democracy. The Chrysler-run Detroit tank arsenal, sprawling over 1,000 acres, could produce nearly 100 Sherman tanks in a single month. In Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Washington state, entire factories shifted from making automobiles and trains to churning out tanks, guns, and ammunition day and night. Men and women, millions of them, worked in 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, under the glow of factory lights that never dimmed. By 1944, American factories had produced more than 40,000 Sherman tanks. Japan, by contrast, had built barely 2,000 Hagos, many already lost in earlier campaigns. The imbalance was staggering, not just in numbers, but in philosophy. The United States waged war through machines. Japan waged war through spirit. On Saipan, those two worlds were about to collide. In the early hours before the American invasion, Japanese soldiers dug into positions across the island. Tank crews performed final maintenance checks, cleaning their weapons, loading ammunition, and reciting prayers. Many had painted the rising sun on the sides of their turrets, symbols of honor and destiny. But beneath the calm there was unease. Their commanders had told them the Americans would be weak, soft, and untested. Yet reports from earlier battles, Tarawa, Kwajalein, and Eniwetok, told a different story. The Americans were relentless, and their weapons devastatingly effective. Still, the 9th Tank Regiment prepared to fight. On June 15, 1944, the sea around Saipan erupted in flame. Thousands of shells and rockets crashed onto the beaches. American warships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers unleashed a bombardment so intense that entire hillsides vanished. The defenders waited, trembling under the shock waves. And then, through the smoke, came the landing craft, hundreds of them. The battle for Saipan had begun.